Kami ucapkan selamat pagi dan selamat datang kepada yang kami hormati Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama Kiai Haji Dr. Honoris Causa Yahya Khalil Stakuf. Terima kasih atas kehadirannya dan tentunya kepada Bapak Ibu, para tamu undangan, serta Bapak Ibu hadirin peserta sekalian. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, kita akan memulai acara di kesempatan pagi hari ini. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Kami menyapa terlebih dahulu tamu dengan kehormatan yang sudah hadir pada kesempatan pagi hari ini. Yang terhormat Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama Kiai Haji Dr. Honoris Causa Yahya Khalil Stakuf. Juga hadir yang kami hormati Wakil Rektor Bidang Pendidikan dan Pengajaran Universitas Gadjah Mada. To our special invited speakers, Professor Dr. Mary Ann Glendon, Professor from Harvard University. Thank you very much for come. And also I'd like to say welcome to Professor Robert W. Hefner, Professor from Boston University. And also to Dr. Timothy Shah, Editor in Center for Shared Civilizational Values. Profesor Mohtar Masud, Professor from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Profesor Al-Makin, Rektor UIN Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, and also Dr. Najib Aska, Editor from Universitas Gadjah Mada, and also distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all of participants. Welcome to Universitas Gadjah Mada, one of the oldest university in Indonesia, and welcome to the Senate Hall in the center building of Universitas Gadjah Mada. This building is inaugurated by the first President of Indonesia, Soekarno, in 1959. And today, Universitas Gadjah Mada have a great honor of welcoming all participants on book launching proceedings of the R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders. R20 merupakan event strategis yang menjadi salah satu terobosan penting Indonesia melalui Nahdlatul Ulama dalam menciptakan perdamaian, harmoni, dan stabilitas global, di mana agama mengambil peran yang penting dan juga signifikan. Tentunya, hasil kesepakatan dan ide besar para tokoh agama ini berhasil dikompilasikan menjadi sebuah buku yang bersama-sama akan diluncurkan pada kesempatan pagi hari ini. To get things started, we kindly ask all participants to stand up for a moment to singing the national anthem of Indonesia. Hadirin sekalian, mengawali acara pada pagi hari ini, marilah bersama-sama kita menyanyikan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya. Hadirin dimohon berdiri. Hadirin disilakan duduk kembali. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, next we will listen to the welcoming remarks from the head of Center for Security Studies and Peace, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Dr. Ahmad Munjid. We kindly ask to have a speech, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished speakers, respected guests, it's my honor to welcome you all on behalf of the Center for Security and Peace Studies, as well as University of Nahdlatul Ulama, the co-organizer of this event. So first of all, I thank you all for making the time to attend this event, and I hope that our event will be productive and fruitful. We also thank all the partner and committee who have this event possible. As you know, that this event is part of a series of initiatives started by PBNU, the ideas of Gadjah. It was started in Bali last year. And after this, we also will have another event related to this R20 book launching. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that globally, our democracy today is not in a good condition. VDEM of Sweden reported, as well as the Heritage Foundation, that our democracy today, the status of our democracy today is sliding back to 1989. 60% of the population live under authoritarian ruler. And especially next year is the tipping point of the future of democracy, because the three largest democracy will have election. That is India, United States, and Indonesia. So the result of the election next year will determine whether our democracy globally will be better or even will be off the cliff. And so far, in many places, religion has been part of the problem related to politics, related to environment, related to social issues and others. So the R20 has been started as a new perspective to make sure that religion is not part of the problem, but part of the solution. And we know even in our backyard in ASEAN, what happened in Thailand is very disturbing. What happened in Myanmar is very disturbing. What happened in the Philippines is very disturbing. So we hope that this event and the series of initiatives related to this event, as well as other initiatives by other organizations and community, will help us to make sure that our democracy, our social life will improve. So again, I thank everybody for attending this event, and I hope that this event will be productive and we will continue to work together. Thank you so very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much Dr. Ahmad Munjid for the welcoming remarks. Dan hadirin sekalian, berikutnya kita akan dengarkan bersama sambutan dari Rektor Universitas Gadjah Mada. Ladies and gentlemen, next we listen to the welcoming speech from Rector of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Profesor Dr. Ova Emilia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semuanya. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Puji syukur marilah kita panjatkan kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala yang senantiasa melimpahkan berkah dan karunia-Nya sehingga kita semua bisa menghadiri acara peluncuran dan diskusi buku Proceedings of the R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders yang menjadi satu rangkaian event ASEAN IIDC sebagai forum kesinambungan Region of 20. Saya sangat mengapresiasi inisiasi PBNU yang menjadi koordinator agenda ASEAN IIDC dan berhasil mengundang keterlibatan 150 pemimpin agama-agama di ASEAN, termasuk Indonesia. Keketuaan Indonesia dalam forum ini menunjukkan bagaimana peran diplomasi agama mampu menciptakan perdamaian, stabilitas sosial, membangun dialog, dan perdamaian antar bangsa. Hadirin yang saya hormati, buku Region of 20 yang diluncurkan hari ini berisi 47 makalah dan memuat catatan reflektif serta kesepakatan bersama dari berbagai pemimpin agama sedunia atas keprihatinan munculnya konflik berlatar belakang sosial keagamaan yang merusak tatanan nilai peradaban manusia. Poin utama para cendekiawan agama dalam buku ini tentu menjadi terang jalan bagi capaian nilai-nilai perdamaian, menjembatani perbedaan, mendorong dialog antar agama, maupun program pemberdayaan masyarakat. Semoga kesepakatan dan ide besar buku ini mampu menjadi rujukan para pemimpin dunia, terutama sebagai bahan pertimbangan dalam mengambil kebijakan global. Selamat mengikuti forum diskusi buku R20 dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Forum peluncuran dan diskusi buku Proceedings of the R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders dinyatakan dibuka. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om. Namo Buddhaya.
Terima kasih. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, selanjutnya sebuah kehormatan kami mengundang Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama untuk menyampaikan pidato kuncinya pada kesempatan pagi hari ini. Kami undang dengan hormat Kiai Haji Dr. Honoris Causa Yahya Khalil Stakuf. Kami silakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, syukurillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, Sayyidina Maulana Muhammad ibn Abdullah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi mawalah, mabad. Honorable Rector of Gadjah Mada University and Madam Deputy Rector who is here with us, Honorable Ambassador Glendon, welcome to Yogyakarta. Distinguished speakers and participants, first let me express our gratitude to Gadjah Mada University that allows us to have this event in this very honorable place, if not a sacred place for this university, because this is the Senate building. And of course, thanks you also for publishing the books that we that we create from the event that we had November last year in Bali in Yogyakarta, which is the R20 event. This is a very a moment that has a very deep meaning for me, because there is no better place than back home, especially for a runaway child like me. It's so great to meet old friends, my teachers and masters in this occasion, my beloved Master Kiai Haji Mokhtar Mas'ud, alhamdulillah Pak Mokhtar, di tengah maraknya keributan nasab Ba'alwi, nasib saya semakin membaik, alhamdulillah. This joke will not be as good as it is if I say it in English, so I say it in Indonesian. Ladies and gentlemen, in the wake of upcoming general election these days, that we will have on February next year, people are talking about the threat of identity politics. People are seeing that identity politics can pose a severe danger to our society, as what we experienced in the last general elections. At least the last two general elections, we had very, very bad experiences related to identity politics, when people use religion as a weapon to gain political support and to attack others. This issue actually has a very broad ramification, and at the same time, very deep root in the discourse of religious teachings itself. I and our colleagues, the believers of Islam, would ask a question. If identity politics is not good or even forbidden, then is it really not good to bring religion into public and social spaces? Because bringing religion as identity into politics actually comes from the motivation or even instinct of religious believers to bring religion, their religion, into public and social space. People are talking also at the same time that religion should be left for only private space, for individual private space. The logic of this kind of articulation is that religion, when it is brought into social and public space, then that will risk a competition between different religions, fight between religions against each other over domination of the public and social spaces. The danger of this is kind of obvious to us. Of course, it is dangerous to allow religion to fight each other over domination on public and social spaces. Because nowadays we are living different groups, groups of different religions are living next to each other in the same neighborhood. So if we allow such fighting to happen, then it will raise a great danger to the safety, the stability of the whole society. But then again, it is a deep question for us, believers of religion. Do we have to bring religion? Are we allowed to bring religion into public and social life or not? If we think about it again, ladies and gentlemen, religions gave birth to civilization, great and noble civilization. If we look into the history of human civilization for thousands of years, we will see how religion played a key role in the raising of every and each of great civilization in the world. You can look at the Egyptian civilization, the ancient Rome and the Christian Rome. You can look at Islam and the Arab. In every moment of the raising of civilization, religion played a vital role, or even the most fundamental role. So for us, and this is so obvious for believers like me and my colleagues, because we believe that religion is meant to build civilization. Religion is given by God to us to help us develop civilization. And developing civilization means developing social spaces, developing the whole social structure. So if religion is meant to develop civilization, why cannot it be brought into social space? What is the function of religion now if it is not allowed to take part in the development of the whole social life of human society? So this is a very fundamental question from our direction. But at the same time, we are aware, of course, certainly, about the danger of the dynamics that will happen when people bring religion into broader social and political life. It's like identity politics is almost within the initial instinct of religion itself. So now what do we do? How can we preserve the function of religion in our civilization while at the same time prevent the dangerous risk that can potentially come along with the expression of religion itself? So, upon this deep concern, this deep and true, a genuine concern of believers that this R20 initiative was started. We are seeking a way of how we can continue uphold our religion and even make it as a contribution to the upcoming civilization that the whole global society are striving toward. But at the same time, we have to prevent our religion to become a problem. That's why the creed of this R20 initiative is to stop religion as source of the problem and start to make it a source of solution. This is just a start. There's still a long, long way to go. We know the direction where we need to go. Also, we still do not yet what would be the end of the, what is there at the end of the road. It's still a struggle going on, a fierce fight maybe, but the intention is to call for all people of religion, to call for all people of goodwill to join this effort together for a shared vision that we need a new human civilization which is built upon an international order that is truly harmonious and just, truly just and harmonious, founded upon respect for the equal right and dignity for every human being. Because this vision is the only reasonable vision if we want all humanity to survive. So again, thank you for your participation in this, and I hope that you all will join us together in this long journey and maybe difficult struggle for our future together. Like John Lennon said, maybe, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us. So thank you. Wallahul muwaffiq ila aqwamit thoriq. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih kami sampaikan untuk pidato kuncinya pada pagi hari ini Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama Bapak Kiai Haji Dr. Honoris Causa Yahya Khalil Stakuf. Ladies and gentlemen, next it is a great pleasure for all of us to invite you, the professor from Harvard University, to deliver a keynote speech. So we would like to invite Professor Dr. Mary Ann Glendon, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor and such a pleasure to have been invited to say a few words about this wonderful book that we're launching today. So I'd like to begin with a traditional Irish greeting that used to be said when a visitor comes to a home of a friend or a neighbor or even a complete stranger. God bless everyone in this house. This book, I would have brought it up here, but it's kind of heavy. But imagine this book. This book was the product. It could not even have existed without the collaboration of many people. And so it seems fit and proper to begin with acknowledging some of the protagonists of the process that led to the R20 and to this wonderful volume. Special thanks are, of course, due to the inspiring leadership of Gadjah and of all the men and women of Nahdlatul Ulama who worked so hard through the process. And special thanks also to this distinguished university for publishing the book. You can't have a book without a publisher. And thanks for hosting this meeting today. And what shall I say about the three editors of this book? Dr. Muhammad Najib Azka, Timothy Shaw, Holland Taylor. They put in so much effort, and they accomplished something that almost never happens in the academic world. They published a conference book within a few months of the actual conference. Never happens. So congratulations to all of them. My remarks this morning are going to be directed toward three aspects, three topics covered by the volume. I'd like to say a little bit about why the G20 decision to have an R20, to establish an R20, was so significant. Second, I'd like to offer some reflection on how fortuitous it was that the first R20 was held in Indonesia, the heartland of moderate Islam. And I'll conclude with some observations about the implications of the R20 for the future of interfaith conversations and the movement for shared civilizational values. So first, the G20's decision to emphasize the role of religion more explicitly in geopolitical deliberations was a refreshing change, was it not, from the tendency on the part of international policymakers to either treat religion with disdain or as a source of division and conflict. Even so, it has to be said that the G20's decision was long overdue. After all, religion is one of the main forces that motivates people. Religion's influence on politics around the world is growing, for better or for worse, and religious adherents constitute over 4/5 of the world's population. Given all those facts, it's hard to see how the ambitious aims of the R20 could be accomplished without paying closer attention to religion. I'm sure that a major factor in preparing the way for the G20 decision was probably the decision made back in 1999 by the G7 to establish the G20. By bringing more non-Western populations into the sphere of global governance, the G7 acknowledged the need for a deeper understanding of what shapes global sentiments and a better sense of what is needed to meet global challenges. After that, all that was needed was for the Indonesian government to make the R20 a reality and to make it the resounding success that it was. If last November's meeting had done nothing more than focus the attention of the G20 on the ways in which the world's religions can contribute to the maintenance of healthy societies, that alone would have made it a memorable event. But the R20 broke new ground in other ways, which brings me to my second point. Among the most important results of the R20 was to heighten awareness of developments in Islam that are far too little known in other parts of the world. James Dorsey, almost alone, has been trying to bring the news to the rest of the world. And recently, it seems that a few other journalists are picking up the story. A month after the R20 ended, the Canadian journalist Raymond D'Souza, whose ancestors come from Goa, he described the R20 as immensely significant, the biggest recent news in the Islamic world. He wrote that, quote, by bringing the Nahdlatul Ulama tradition to international attention, the R20 offered new resources for the civilization-shaping project of Islamic reform. He was particularly struck by the fact, and again I'm quoting him, an alternative Islamic experience was offered from Asia to Arabia. Then, 2 months later, a writer for The Hill, a political magazine widely read by Washington decision makers, he noted the significance of the fact that the R20 was organized by the world's largest Muslim political organization, that it was held in the world's largest Muslim majority nation, and that Indonesia happens to be the most successful democracy in the Islamic world. That led him to say to the readers of The Hill, and I'll be quoting here, a remarkable transformation has been taking place in the Muslim world, a years-long shift toward pluralism and tolerance, contradicting common assumptions about Islam. At the G20's groundbreaking religion forum in Bali, that transformation took center stage. I would only add to those observations the symbolic significance of the fact that the R20 was held in a Hindu region of a Muslim majority nation. That fact alone spoke volumes about Indonesia's distinctive model of religious pluralism and the progress that Indonesia has made toward an ethos of religious freedom and social harmony. And of potentially even broader significance is the fact that the Indonesian commitment to unity within diversity derives, as Pak Yahya has taught us, from an ancient Indo-Islamic tradition that extends far beyond Indonesia. As Pak Yahya explained in a recent speech, the Ashoka tradition is part of a shared civilizational legacy that belongs to the many religiously and ethnically diverse nations of the Indo-Pacific, and it's a legacy that respects tolerance and diversity. Now to my third point. Another ground-making aspect of the R20 was the welcoming and open atmosphere that prompted the writer for The Hill to say the meeting helped to create the world's most important interfaith conversations. Why did he say that? Well, those of you who were at the R20 last November will remember what was so special about those conversations. Speakers from a range of faith traditions departed from the usual platitudes of interfaith dialogue. Instead, they grappled head-on with such difficult, challenging topics as dealing with historical grievances, reconciling shared principles with cultural diversity, and the sensitive matter of discerning problematic elements within their own traditions that may have contributed to hostility and violence. And many of you will also recall that the speakers frankly acknowledged that religion has all too often, unfortunately, been a source of problems rather than solutions. Many of the speakers acknowledged the need for religious leaders to educate their followers, to reject ideologies that promote violence and manipulate religion for political purposes. Many emphasized the need for religious leaders to motivate their followers to live out their religions in such a way as to show to others the real contribution that religion can make to social peace and harmony. The participants were urged to be candid in discussing the values our respective traditions need to give up in order to assure that religion functions as a genuine source of solutions. Most of the participants responded willingly to that invitation, and after the conference, anthropologist Jonathan Benthall wrote that the discussions had broken new ground in the effort, quote, to confront openly and actively the hard texts of each religion rather than trying to explain them away. That same aspect of the R20 also caught the attention of a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Richard Ostling. He wrote that the campaign for re-examination of parts of Muslim law, quote, could potentially affect the future of the world's second largest faith regarding democracy, human rights, education, the role of women, treatment of other religions, warfare, extremism, terrorism, and crime and punishment. That's quite a list. I, as a Roman Catholic, I'm old enough to remember my own church's efforts at reform and renewal in Vatican II, and I can only applaud the willingness of so many participants at the R20 to undertake such a process. I can testify from the experience of Vatican II that that effort, like any other digging up of the past, that can result in some uncomfortable and even painful discoveries. But it is also likely to lead to a fresh appreciation of deep truths that have long been obscured. And I can also testify that the process of self-examination is not a one-time thing. It must go on indefinitely if we are to live up to what is highest and best in each of our religious traditions. And finally, I would like to call attention to the way in which the materials collected in this wonderful book have given a boost to the idea that there are some principles of decent human conduct that are universally valid. There are some things that are so good that no one will openly oppose them, and there are some things that are so terrible that virtually no one will openly approve of them. That was the idea that inspired the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 75th anniversary we celebrate this year. And as I'm sure everybody knows, that idea has taken quite a pounding in recent years. Human rights today are widely misunderstood, often misinterpreted, routinely ignored by more than a few nations. And the international consensus that once supported that declaration is faltering. But the contributions to this volume provide encouraging evidence that belief in the existence of universal principles is still strong, and that most religious traditions contain rich resources for overcoming parochialism and fostering the goal of promoting unity while respecting diversity. The R20 ended with an inspiring communique. I'll quote just a part of it. It calls on religious and political leaders, people of good faith, goodwill of every faith, to join in building a global alliance founded on shared values in order to prevent the political weaponization of identity, to curtail the spread of communal hatred, to promote solidarity and respect among diverse peoples, cultures, and nations of the world, end quote. That is a call that deserves to be heard and amplified in every corner of the world. And God willing, inshallah, this book will make it so. But for that to happen, there's a but here. But for that to happen, there's still much work to be done, hard work. Mohammed Najib Aska, Timothy Shaw, Holland Taylor have already accomplished heroic work, but now it is up to all of us to ensure that the hopeful news that they bring is heard far and wide. One way to do that is to see that the book is reviewed in as many places as possible. Another is to get the book into the hands of as many people as possible who need to be aware of its important messages. And another way is simply by word of mouth. Many years ago, when I first started teaching, I was told that you have to repeat something at least 7 times for it to enter into long-term memory. I don't know whether that is true, but I know that it helps to get an idea across if it is heard from many sources, if it is heard often, and if it is expressed in different ways. So let's thank our 3 co-editors for their great work, and let's resolve to do all that we can to make it heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the most important part of today's program. We will have a book launching. Peluncuran buku R20 ini nantinya akan ditandai dengan penyerahan simbolis oleh Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama dan juga Wakil Rektor Bidang Pendidikan dan Pengajaran Universitas Gadjah Mada kepada para tamu undangan kehormatan yang sudah hadir di kesempatan pagi hari ini. So we like to invite to proceed to the stage the first Rektor UIN Sunan Kalijaga Yogyakarta and also Rektor of Universitas Islam Indonesia, Rektor of Universitas Nahdlatul Ulama Yogyakarta, and also we like to invite Mr. Taylor Holland from Center for Shared Civilizational Values, and also we like to invite Professor Mary Ann Glendon, please to proceed to the stage, and also we like to invite Bapak Muhsin Shihab from Kemenlu, and also Professor Mohtar Masud, Professor Robert W. Hefner from Boston University, dan kami juga mengundang kepada Bapak Kiai Masud Masduki, mohon berkenan juga untuk bisa bergabung bersama ke depan. Selanjutnya kami mengundang kepada Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama serta Wakil Rektor Bidang Pendidikan dan Pengajaran untuk dapat menyerahkan buku sebagai tanda simbolis buku R20 telah diluncurkan pada kesempatan pagi hari ini. Buku diserahkan kepada para tamu dengan kehormatan yang hadir pada pagi hari ini, dari mulai Rektor UIN Sunan Kalijaga Yogyakarta, Rektor Universitas Islam Indonesia, Rektor Universitas Nahdlatul Ulama, serta kepada para tamu dengan kehormatan kita yang hadir, Profesor Mary Ann Glendon, Profesor from Harvard University, dan juga kepada Bapak Muhsin Shihab dari Kementerian Luar Negeri Republik Indonesia, and also to Mr. Taylor Holland from Center for Shared Civilizational Values to proceed to the stage, and to Professor Mohtar Masud, and also to Professor Robert W. Hefner, and the last for Kiai Masud Masduki. Dan selanjutnya mohon berkenan untuk berfoto bersama terlebih dahulu kepada Ketua PBNU dan juga Wakil Rektor Bidang Pendidikan dan Pengajaran. Please to have a photo session together first. Yes. So once again, the R20 is the strategic event from Nahdlatul Ulama to create the peace, harmony, and also the stability global, where the religion is take connection to the world. Thank you very much for all the invited guests. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please give applause for the book launching for this morning. Thank you very much. Thank you. After all of the book launching, ladies and gentlemen, for the next agenda, we will have some discussion, especially a book discussion. And to begin the discussion, we are pleased to Vice Rector for Education and Learning Universitas Gadjah Mada to chair this discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our moderator, Vice Rector for Education and Learning. Selain menjabat sebagai Wakil Rektor Bidang Pendidikan dan Pengajaran, Profesor Dr. Wening Udasmoro ini juga pernah menjabat sebagai Direktur Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies. So, for the discussion, we'd like to invite to the moderator to have a discussion, to chair this discussion for about 90 minutes. Profesor Dr. Wening Udasmoro, please.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor for me to be moderator in this discussion. As we know that we launched already finally the book, and we are very proud because it is published by Universitas Gadjah Mada Press. It is also an honor for us. We know that this book is the result of the Bali meeting, the proceeding. This is the proceeding of the R20, International Summit of Religious Leaders. And maybe most of us here, we still believe that religion is a positive force. So we believe also that religion still have hopes to solve the global problem we face today. In order to look at a little bit the content of the books and also how some of the scholars, they give their arguments also a perspective about this book. We'll have discussion today. And please welcome first Mas Najib Aska to come here. He is one of the editor of this book. And the second one is Dr. Timothy. Yeah. Dr. Timothy Samuel Shah, also one of the editor. Also there are 3 editors, but we are here having 2 editors of this book. And then the third one is Professor Al-Makin, the rector of Islamic State University of Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. And also we'll have Professor Muhtar Masud, the Professor of Political Science of Universitas Gadjah Mada. And also we will have Pak Bob, Professor Robert Hefner from Boston University. So to start this meeting, for not taking too long for the introduction, I will invite first Dr. Najib Aska, the editor of the book. Dr. Najib Aska is a lecturer in the Universitas Gadjah Mada. He's from the Faculty of Political Science, and he's graduated from University of Amsterdam. And he is expert on the sociology of religion, the youth, conflict, peace building, and also the expert of international relations, religious freedom, and global politics, and also, I think, social movement. That's right, Mas Najib. So please, you will have 10 minutes to talk about the books you have edited. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Wening, Professor Wening Udasmoro, the Vice Rector of UGM, as the moderator of the chair of this session. First of all, I would like to ask for apology for all, while we are of course feeling proud with the appreciation highly presented by Prof. Mary Ann Glendon and also Gus Yahya, but actually we would like to say that during the final draft of this book was done, actually 2 of the editors was on leave. Charles Howland Taylor and me was on Hajj during the final draft of this book was done. So actually most of the work of the labor actually done by Timothy Samuel Shah. So give applause to him. Yeah, this is just finalized, I think, around 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. Yeah, when we were, two of us was on Hajj, and actually Pak Tim, who's done most of the thing and checking all the thing, including the detail of the book. So that is the first. And then the second one, actually, I would like to put a little bit this book of R20 in context, although it has been presented very eloquently by Professor Mary Ann Glendon in her keynote speech, which is basically that the book, this book is actually the result of important, let's say, shift in global affairs in terms of how religion is repositioned, while in long period of time of history, actually, religion located in marginal position in the global affairs, in international diplomacy. So this is the first time where actually G20 summit actually involves religious leader in such prestigious forum of R20. Adding to that, actually some point have been presented very eloquently by Professor Mary Ann Glendon. I would like to say that this also happened in a kind of geopolitical shift in terms of how actually then Indonesia and also Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and more particularly, how then the R20 is actually co-hosted by Nahdlatul Ulama with World Muslim League, which is quite new development in such geopolitical situation. And this is actually important to say that such initiative or R20 is still continuing, still revolving, and we are actually still also look forward for something to happen in India quite soon. And lastly, regarding also the R20 and the book, that this R20 is actually not the start of the initiative done by Nahdlatul Ulama. It's not also the end. This is actually part of the previous effort has been done before, and some document actually reflected that effort done by Nahdlatul Ulama in this book, especially I think in part 4, which is mostly regarding about what values do our respective tradition need to relinquish to ensure that religion function as a genuine and dynamic source of solution. So this is actually some example on that. And of course, this is not the end. As we know all that actually next week on Monday, we will hold another important event, namely ASEAN IIDC, Intercultural and Interreligious Dialogue Conference, which is also continuation of this effort. So, in short, that this book is actually part of a massive effort has been done to transform actually event into movement. So we don't want to have just an event, just R20 event or ASEAN IIDC event, but we are part of the global movement of shared civilizational values. And then I would like to give some highlight of the book, because I know that most of the actually audiences are not reading this book, but it will be available for open access quite soon. I think we are now discussing with the OKM Press. Basically, this book will be available for open access, so hopefully will be read by all of the readers in the world. So, but I would like to highlight some of the important side of the book. First, that the book is structure consists of 9 parts. 9 parts, yeah. 6 bagian, 9 part of the book. Each consists of several remarks or point or address in this. It starts with, of course, the plenary session 1, consists of opening, greeting by some important figure, including, of course, President Joko Widodo. Also, we have a greeting here by His Holiness Pope Francis, the Holy See. We also have this welcome address by His Excellency Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Karim Al Isa from Saudi Arabia. We have also address by His Holiness Swami Govinda Dev Giri Maharaj from India, and some others. So really significant figure contribute and documented in this book. The second one is actually about the plenary session 2, about shared values and reciprocities. We have there wonderful keynote address by, again, Prof. Mary Ann Glendon on the quest for shared civilizational values over there. We have also important address by His All Holiness Patriarch Kirill from Russia. Also important address, I think, from His Excellency Andres Pastrana Arango from Colombia regarding Western humanism, Christian democracy, and humanitarian Islam, an alliance for the 21st century. Wonderful remark on that. And then the part 3, on plenary session 3, actually regarding historical grievances, truth-telling, reconciliation, and forgiveness. And this is truly one of the unique contribution of R20 comparing to previous dialogue, interfaith dialogue, and such on, because this is actually talking about very sensitive issue regarding historical grievances, about the past, about the bitter past, about how actually interfaith, intercultural having bitter past, having bad experience in the past. And we have to deal with that issue, of course, delicately, eloquently, through historical grievances and going through that, through telling, and that is important step to reconciliation and forgiveness. And the next important part is actually on plenary session. I just mentioned before that what values do respective tradition need to relinquish to ensure that religion function as a genuine and dynamic source of solution. Actually, the original text during the summit is that recontextualization about problematic and obsolete tenet in religious teaching. So this is actually very important issue, how each tradition, each religion should recontextualize, should rethink, should reflect about some problematic issues, some obsolete tenet inside. I would like to highlight some important keynote over there. One of them is actually by Rabbi Professor Alan Brill, problematic exclusivist text. He is one of the leading figure in Jewish tradition. He actually planned to come here in the beginning, but there is some health issues who actually hindered him to come, fortunately, very fortunately. Another issue, for example, addressed by Reverend Matthew Hassan Kuka from Nigeria regarding the weaponization of religious identity, a view from Africa. This is really important experience from Africa regarding that. Also by K. Haji Olil Absal Abdallah here regarding Islamic jurisprudence for a global civilization. And there are some important texts as well, put it here, such as actually about recontextualization of fiqh, Islamic law, and transformation of the prevailing Muslim mindset for the sake of world peace to achieve a harmonious communal life for all mankind by K. Haji Yahya Khalil Stakuf. And also, I think, very important declaration on the National Conference of Nahdlatul Ulama Religious Scholar, the Nation, Citizenship, and State Law, which is part of the decree of Bahsul Masail al-Diniyah al-Maudiyah in 2019. Also, important address by Professor Ahmad Guru from Turkey regarding religious reform in the 21st century defending minority rights. So that is part of the very, very important point, important issue actually discussed in this book. So yeah, that is some point that I would like to highlight, of course, will continue by my dear friend, Timothy Samuel Shah. Please, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Mas Najib. I think now we'll listen to Dr. Timothy Samuel Shah. He is co-founder and the director of strategic initiatives at CSCV. Yeah, please, Dr. Timothy.
Terima kasih. Selamat pagi. Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone. What a joy, what a privilege, what an honor to be part of this magnificent enterprise and project. I have very brief remarks I'd like to make, and my remarks have two parts. The first part of my remarks I'd like to call Gotong Royong. And the second part of my remarks I would like to call A Tale of Two Professors. So the first part of my remarks, this whole enterprise would not have been possible without what is called in Indonesia Gotong Royong. Every great achievement is never, I think, the accomplishment of just one person, but every great achievement reflects usually a team effort. And this volume reflects a massive communal endeavor. And I must say, in my entire life, I have never experienced a depth of cooperation and a sense of family, a sense of many people coming together to fulfill a common task, as I have seen in Nahdlatul Ulama. And even though I am not a Muslim, I am an Indian American Catholic, and there's no good reason why I should have anything to do with Nahdlatul Ulama, but I have been welcomed into the heart of the family of Nahdlatul Ulama, and it has been a tremendous privilege to work alongside the great men and women of Nahdlatul Ulama, without whom there would have been no R20, there would have been no R20 volume. So this is a wonderful example of Gotong Royong, of cooperation and team spirit in every possible way. Most of the people in this room contributed in some important way to the R20 event in Bali last November. Most of the people in this room contributed in some way to the volume. Most of the people in the room contributed to, of course, this event, and now the event coming up on Monday, the ASEAN Intercultural and Interreligious Dialogue Conference. And I would like, especially, if I may, to thank all the organizing committee of the R20, many of whom are here, Pak Eko, Pak Suedi, Ibu Rosa, and many, many others who made the R20 summit in Bali possible, and also are making this event possible and making the ASEAN conference on Monday possible. And I'm also just delighted to say that I have experienced a tremendous depth of friendship and cooperation, and just a deep, deep camaraderie with my friend Pak Holland Taylor. We have worked deeply, closely together, spent thousands of hours working on this project and many others, and it's a great privilege, Holland, to be your friend and to be your comrade in arms. And let me also add my thanks to what Marianne Glendon articulated, thanks to the inspiring leadership of Gus Yahya. It was a privilege to meet you just a few years ago, and it's been a privilege to work alongside you and to be under your inspiring leadership, as Marianne said. And I also finally want to thank the extraordinary staff of Universitas Gadjah Mada Press. And I'm very happy to say that the director of the press is in the room, Pak Wayan Mustaka, and I'd like him to stand. Pak Wayan, yes, please let's everyone thank Pak Wayan. Pak Wayan was very patient with us because we did extensive proofreading. In the proofreading stage, this manuscript went through 10 versions, 10 revisions. So I think Pak Wayan's layout person was working 24/7 for the last few weeks. So Pak Wayan, Makasi. Your team was absolutely extraordinary, cheerful, hardworking professional at every point. So thank you very much to Pak Wayan and the University of Gadjah Mada Press. It's a tremendous honor that you saw fit to publish our work, and so we thank the entire university. So that was the first part of my remarks. The second part of my remarks I'd like to call a tale of two professors. I had the privilege of studying at Harvard University in the 1990s, and the 1990s was, of course, a very exciting time to be studying international politics. That's what I was studying. The Cold War had ended, the Berlin Wall had come down, the Cold War binary reality of world politics had suddenly disappeared, and a new world was coming into being. And it was at that very time that I was studying political science as an undergraduate and a PhD student at Harvard. So it was a tremendously exciting time to think about what kind of world was coming into being after the end of the Cold War. And I had the privilege of being at Harvard when there were two major figures at Harvard thinking about what kind of world would come into being. So this second set of remarks I have to make is, as I said, a tale of two professors. I want to talk about the visions that two professors who loomed very large for me on the Harvard campus at the time had for the world that was coming into being. One professor I worked with very closely, he had a very realist and you could almost say pessimistic understanding of the world that was coming into being because there was tremendous euphoria after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Many people thought that we were seeing the creation of a single a common civilization and world in which there would be peace, there would be complete harmony, there would be no conflict, the world was all moving in one political direction, and this vision was articulated most famously by Francis Fukuyama, who famously wrote an article in the National Interest in 1990, 1991, I believe, called The End of History. And then he followed that article up with a book called The End of History and the Last Man. And essentially what Fukuyama argued was that the whole world was becoming essentially modeled on the political and economic framework of the West. The whole world was becoming like the West, was adopting liberal democracy like the West, was adopting capitalism like the West, and essentially argued that history had only one direction. And all the countries of the world were moving in that one direction, and eventually the whole world would adopt essentially a quasi-Western kind of consumerist and individualist culture. And in Francis Fukuyama's vision, essentially all problems, major problems, would be solved, and the only real problem was that history would become so boring that no one would know what to do, that people would just be bored because there would be no major ideological battles to be fought, there would be no political and economic struggles, there would just be one common world, one common solution. And even if people didn't go to the extreme of Francis Fukuyama, many people thought that, well, yes, all of our major problems are solved. We're going to create one global cosmopolis, one world order. And of course, President George H.W. Bush famously referred to the building of a new world order at this very time in the early 1990s. Well, I had a professor who was not so sure about this. He was a cold-eyed realist, and he thought this was complete bunk. He thought that this idea that the world was moving in one direction was crazy. And I remember having lunch with this professor. It was December 1992. I was taking his seminar on comparative politics, and I had great admiration for his intelligence and his energy, and he told me over lunch, you know, I'm working on an article on culture, because I think culture and religion are going to be coming back in world politics. And I was struck by this. I was a religious person myself, and I was, in a sense, pleased to hear that my great professor tell me that religion was going to make a kind of comeback, contrary to what Francis Fukuyama was saying in The End of History. Well, a few months later, my professor, who was Samuel Huntington, published a famous article called The Clash of Civilizations. I have the original Foreign Affairs copy here that I bought on the newsstand. In the summer of 1993, exactly 30 years ago this summer, Samuel Huntington said, let's wait a minute. The fact that the world has seen the end of the Cold War, the end of this ideological conflict, does not mean that conflict is going to disappear, because culture and religion and civilization are enduring realities. People are going to continue to think of themselves in primarily cultural and civilizational terms, and he pointed out, correctly in my view, that religion was much more powerful than Francis Fukuyama understood. Samuel Huntington was a great scholar, a tremendous teacher for whom I had great admiration and affection. He was not a particularly religious person, but he, as a realist, was convinced that culture and religion were going to be important. And he also was convinced that we would see a growth of cultural conflict. That because people took their culture so seriously, when push came to shove, they would fight for their culture. They would fight for their civilization. They would fight for their identity. And even though he did not use the phrase identity politics, that was not the dominant framework of the Clash of Civilizations, he, in a sense, prophesied correctly that the world would see a rise of identity conflict and identity politics, both inside societies and between societies. Now, he also, I think to his credit, saw that even though there was going to be a rise of cultural conflict, civilizational conflict, the world history was not going to end, there was going to be a division, he also hoped, he at least had a vision, that it might be possible for the different civilizations of the world, as different as they were, to come together, to actually think about how there might be a common basis for getting along in the world. And I just want to read the very last paragraph of Samuel Huntington's book, which came out 3 years after the article, his book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order. This is the very last paragraph of Samuel Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations. In the 1950s, Lester Pearson of Canada warned that humans were moving into, quote, an age when different civilizations will have to learn to live side by side in peaceful interchange, learning from each other, studying each other's history and ideals and art and culture, mutually enriching each other's lives. The alternative in this overcrowded little world is misunderstanding, tension, clash, and catastrophe. Huntington went on then, the futures of both peace and civilization depend upon understanding and cooperation among the political, spiritual, and intellectual leaders of the world's major civilizations. In the greater clash, the global real clash between civilization with a capital C and barbarism, the world's great civilizations, with their rich accomplishments in religion, art, literature, philosophy, science, technology, morality, and compassion, will also hang together or hang separately. The great civilizations will hang together or hang separately. In the emerging era, clashes of civilizations are the greatest threat to world peace, and an international order based on civilizations is the surest safeguard against world war. So Huntington, as much of a realist and even to an extent a pessimist as he was, he had at least a dim vision that the civilizations of the world, even though they differed greatly, he hoped that they could actually find a way to identify shared values. In a sense, he anticipated in his work on the Clash of Civilizations the very effort that we are here to talk about today, a movement for shared civilizational values. But I think Professor Huntington had a limitation. which is that even though he could see this as a possibility, he did not have a great deal of hope that this would actually be realized, nor did he have a very clear sense of a pathway whereby the civilizations could actually converge. He was not only a realist, but I think had a great deal of pessimism about at least the short-term future, and then the events of September 11th, I think, deepened his sense of pessimism about the possibility of Western, Islamic, Chinese civilization actually coming together. So that's why I said my remarks were a tale of two professors. This one professor had, I think, a correct, largely correct view, a realistic view, far more realistic than Francis Fukuyama's view about the world and about the endurance of culture and religion and civilization. But there was another professor who was very significant for me, even though I never studied formally with her. This professor was, I think, aware of many of the same realities as Professor Huntington. But this professor began to write extensively in the 90s and then published a major book in 2000, 2001, which actually showed a pathway whereby the civilizations could come together, even around very important values and rights. And that professor is sitting in this room. She is the great Marianne Glendon. Professor Glendon saw the world, I would say, in a realistic way, but she was also animated by a sense of hope. And a hope born of her study of the process that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this project occupied much of her time in the 1990s, and then, as I say, led to the publication of a wonderful study, which I strongly urge, based on what Marianne said about word of mouth. I'm going to tell you, everyone go out and buy this book called A World Made New, in which Marianne Glendon describes the process of the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she reminds the world, a world that was, as I said, worried in the 1990s about the possibility of what kind of world was coming into being after the Cold War, a world that was worried about what Huntington described as a clash of civilizations, a world that was worried about whether the civilizations could really come together, even though Huntington thought maybe they should. He didn't really have a vision for how they actually could do that. He didn't have a clear sense of a pathway. Well, Professor Glendon showed us a pathway. She, based on her historical research, showed that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was not a Western imposition, but it was actually countries like the Philippines, countries like Indonesia, the smaller, less powerful countries of Asia and Africa that were advocating for a universal declaration. And many of those who were part of the drafting were channeling those voices and concerns, and many of the cultures of the world actually had a role to play in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And even though Samuel Huntington thought that, well, there's no way the world could agree about human rights, Professor Glendon showed that there was much greater basis for agreement across civilizations than many people at the time thought. And I think part of why Marianne, if I may, had this sense of hope was because of her own personal faith. As a person of faith, she believed and believes today, as we have her here to testify, that human nature is such, created by God, all of us created by one Creator, that we do have a basis, a common human reason, common human understanding, common human experience, on the basis of which we can actually gather and come together. In the Catholic faith that I share with Marianne, we believe that hope is one of the three theological virtues, along with faith and love. I think it's that hope that inspires many of us in this room. Those of us who have faith really do believe that God has not given up on His creation, and very much believe that it is possible for people even very different to come together and experience that Gotong Royong that I was talking about at the beginning of my remarks. We can really come together. And surely the hopeful vision that Marianne articulated on the basis of her historical research is now being vindicated by what Nahdlatul Ulama is accomplishing. Because Samuel Huntington helped us see the problem, Marianne Glendon helped us see we could be hopeful about the problem, but Nahdlatul Ulama is actually giving us a pathway and a vehicle for realizing a hopeful vision. That's something that we have not seen in the world. We have seen self-interested powers seeking to impose their values for the sake of their power, not for the sake of creating a new global civilization. We have seen self-interested actors weaponize identity, weaponize religion, and weaponize culture, but Nahdlatul Ulama, for the sake of building a more harmonious and just, peaceful world order, as Gus Yahya so eloquently said, not for the sake of themselves, not for the sake of self-interest, but for the sake of building a better world, is taking us beyond the pessimism of Samuel Huntington, beyond the excessive optimism of Francis Fukuyama, and creating a world where the great civilizations can retain their distinctive characteristics, but come together in peace on the basis of the shared values that Professor Marianne Glendon showed we do in fact share. So we have Nahdlatul Ulama combining the realism of Samuel Huntington and combining the hopeful vision of Marianne Glendon, and really working in an extraordinary way and a practical way, not just to show us a pathway, but actually to create a practical vehicle for creating a new global civilization based on shared values. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken so much time, but I didn't want to deliver a short sermon. I wanted to deliver a long sermon because I'm so grateful and happy and honored to be part of this wonderful initiative. Thank you all. Thanks again to all of you who are part of the R20, all of you who are part of the volume. Thank you all very, very much. And again, it's a great honor to be a part of this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Timothy Shah. I think both of them, they have the same idea, centrally the periphery. Before, religion was periphery, and now we are, I think, all here trying to put religion also in the central. And then now we give time to Pak Almakin for 15 minutes.
Yeah,
thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Ibu Wening, Pak Najib, Pak Tim, Pak Bob, and Pak Mokhtar Masud. It's my honor to be here, more than pleased to join this forum, and especially Pak Yai, whose vision makes us very proud, and all honorable guests. Thank you very much. Allow me to appreciate the publication of this book, which is incredibly very fast. Indeed, because I was a journal editor, and I need months or even years, more than 1 year, 2 years, just only to fix one journal article. And the publication of the proceeding needs less than a year, 8 months or 7 months perhaps. And I do believe 3 months of working very hard. It is, congratulations, it's incredible achievement of the working team. Please, the next, yes, thank you, the next slide. I would like to appreciate from my humble point of view that indeed the holding of this R20 in Bali, in Yogyakarta, is indeed new ideas. It's a breakthrough idea from Pak Yai and his team. In the summit I indeed did witness and other participants the presentations of many religious leaders from different faiths coming from around the world. And as in other meetings in Indonesia, in the early morning, it was very crowded. I sit in the back because I had no place at the time, all the seats full. But after the break, around 10, little by little, the number of the participants decreased. And then move in the middle. And after the lunch, in the afternoon, I see some empty places. The seats are empty, particularly in the front. So I move in the front. So I was very fortunate. I consider myself. I can hear clearly, and I can see presentation, and also I can see the gesture and the spirit of the body of the presenters. I was very fortunate. That is blessing in disguise. Yes, indeed, the participants decreased in terms of number, but it increased my attention and my concentration. Thank you for the opportunity of attending the R20 in Bali. And of course, I did enjoy new ideas in some presentation, fresh from the ground, from religious leaders who are involved in real activities of churches, vihara, mosques, and other holy places. For the anthropologists and sociologists, this is fresh data from the ground, and many surprises, advices, sharing experiences, and also recommendations, and very timely, particularly in Indonesia, because we are facing 2024. Next year is very important event for the process of democratization, and indeed the political identity, not only in Indonesia but in the world, is on the rise. So R20 in Bali are indeed very timely, and we need such summit meeting. And we cannot say more than it is very important for us. What is the publication of this book for the practical purpose for? For me, as an academic, as a lecturer, as a professor in university, this book, the publication of this book is very important for our classes. We can use this book for the instructions of our students. This is the example of world leaders sharing experiences fresh from the ground. I repeat again, fresh from the ground. This book is very important for anthropological classes, sociological classes, political science classes, and many other fields. And this book will be very useful for the practical purpose. If we need some advices facing, for instance, troubles, Indonesia, we have to honestly admit, we still have some problems, permit to establish churches, for instance, permit to establish vihara or pura, that is place of worship for Hindu, for Buddha, and for minority Christians, and even permit to establish minority Muslim mosques like Ahmadiyya. This book is a guide for us. And the third, of course, this book is very useful for political leaders. I think all our candidates of presidents in 2024 should read these books. They have to seek guidance and advice from world religious leaders. I'm sure all can understand this, because all presenters, as far as I know, and I read 3 days ago, because Pak Najib sent me via WhatsApp, and I have the dummy version. This book is written in a very easy language, can be understood not only by the academics, but also by those who are not involved in the campus. So I think it's very useful. And I think this book also shows leadership in the world. Not only formal leadership like political leaders, governmental leaders, but also informal leaders. You know, Indonesia has so many authorities and non-formal organizations like informal congregation every Friday, every Sunday, every Saturday. We have huge. You can see in our televisions full of ceremonies and preachings. And I think this book has to do with that, and we can, from the academic perspective, we can compare what happened in Indonesia and what happened in the world religions based on the experiences from leaders around the world. And I'm sure this book contains some authentic and genuine advices. I do believe, because I read this book 3 days ago. And besides, I also pay attentively during presentation, and I did there in Bali to enjoy one by one. And what I do really appreciate and quite enlightening is the plurality of the context. This book not based on only Indonesian experience, no. Not only about Christianity, no. Not only about Hinduism, no. Not only about Buddhism, no. But this book contains plurality of context in the world religions. And of course, different faiths, different leaders offer solutions, different kind of solutions. But somehow there are some common ideas to share among world religions, based on different faiths, based on different traditions and different cultures. That's what makes this book is indeed valuable and can guide us to further think what we should do as academic like me and religious leaders, political leaders, and also activists, non-government activists. And I think the last but not least, this is from my humble perspective, this book addressed very relevant issue today: globalization, globality, global development, identity, politics, problem we are facing together, based on, once again, different faiths. Yes, this is the content of the book. You can see, for instance, of course, the plenary session, Pak Najib has mentioned some of them. And then session 2, share values and reciprocity. This is also important. Historical grievance, truth-telling. Some contents indeed are very surprising. It surprised me many times. And session 4, what values do our perspective tradition need to relinquish to ensure that religion function as a genuine and dynamic source of solution rather than problems. I think this to repeat Gadjah, the chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama. Yeah, we are so proud of his position in this. Yeah, and this create another opportunity for us in campus and outside campus to further develop and to further ponder what we should take in terms of further steps. And session 5, what values do we need to develop to ensure peaceful coexistence? I'm sure this is also important, yeah? All of the books indeed important. And what I like, I think Gus Ulil already remarked yesterday during our meeting, which is a spiritual ecology. And in the world Muslim, ecology receives the least attention. We talk about pluralism, we talk about gender equality, we talk about poverty, we talk about stunting, we talk about politics and the way politics should operate in the face of religious authority, but we have less room and we need to increase the room of spiritual ecology, and indeed this book did that. That's what we need. Please allow me to appreciate the book from the content directly, just to remark in the, so please allow me to use glass, I need, because I get older a little bit. Page 9, you don't have it, but later, of course, you can download freely from the PDF format, from the General Chairman of Pak Yai, Gus Yahya. In page 9, I will read little bit, not much, don't worry. I don't need a lot of time. Pak Yai says, the Catholic Church has already undertaken this process with the Second Vatican Council. It's very clear, right? Pak Yai, the chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama, recall Second Vatican Council. His view is indeed inclusive and plural, of course. He aware of that and he remind us Second Vatican Council. How inclusive he is, how Gusdurian he is. And again, he remind us of 2016, a community of Jews, the majority or conservative stream of Judaism, convened a forum of rabbinical scholars and issued 29-page statement that might serve as an inspiration for all of us. The status of non-Jews in Jewish law and lore today. It's very clear. Compare with Nahdlatul Ulama experience, National Conference of Nahdlatul Ulama 2019 in West Java. The status of Muslim and non-Muslim, no longer in a conventional fiqh as merely inviolable. Not merely as inviolable, but look at from sociological, anthropological, and political science perspective. This is indeed breakthrough and shared by other faiths. That is the underlying fact. And please also allow me, I need a couple of minutes. The remark, 1 minute, okay, half, I could divide. The remark from His Holiness Pope Francis in page 12, he reminds us the two principles of spirituality, transcendence and fraternity. Reading the final declaration and conclusion of the Congress, Nur Sultan, that surprised us too. A lot of things to enjoy in this book. So I believe, please read this book. This is important. And it's given freely. You don't have to purchase. And what I like in page 19 is a remark by Sri Ram Jambuni, Tirsetra Trust. He has a poem. I think this poem indicates universality of faith. I will read, "May all beings be happy, may all be healthy, may all see only good days ahead, may no one suffer at all." It's very clear message of universality. And the last, I have a lot of remarks because I read in 3 days, quite a lot. I think we should also appreciate from the perspective of a business and economy. Muhammad Arsyad Rosid, chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. I think it's something different. Kadin, president director of Indica industry. He remarked the importance of talking about economy when we talk about religion. So religion is not in isolation of economy. Religion can play a vital role to boost people's economy. And I am, once again, thank you very much for this. Please, my deep gratitude for the committee and my congratulations for publishing this book in such a very quick, fast, and very effective. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pak Almakin, the rector of UIN Sunan Kalijaga. He is also the writer of the book, I think, False Prophets, because there are a lot of prophets in Indonesia, claiming as prophets. Yeah, he got 3 points about, you know, the purpose of these books, and also for political, for education, and also for practical. And now we'll have Pak Bob Hefner. Pak Bob Hefner is professor at Boston University. I think all of us know Pak Bob Hefner. Please, Pak Bob Hefner, time is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu. It is, of course, a great pleasure always to be back in Indonesia, and it's a particularly great pleasure to be in an environment infused with the values both of Indonesian inclusivity and Nahdlatul Ulama vision. So I thank you, I thank Gus Yahya in particular, for this invitation and for this opportunity for all of us to come together and reflect on issues of great importance to the world, not just to Indonesia and not just to people of religion, but to people who are non-religious as well. So the launching of the book, I will focus my comments today on the book itself, some of the message that it conveys. I was at the R20, had the great honor to be invited again at Gus Yahya's invitation, and I'm grateful for that. But the launching of the book represents something of a transformative moment. Not totally transformative, but significant and transformative nonetheless. It addresses issues, not just the long familiar issues that people like my colleague Peter Berger and I have long addressed, of the positive role that religion can take in promoting progress, inclusivity, but it also takes on squarely the question of what needs to be reformed. What kinds of traditions and legacies need to be addressed critically and rethought. And here again, I think we see the trademark attitude of Nahdlatul Ulama and Gus Yahya in particular, because these are issues to which he has lent his voice, I think, most brilliantly and most consistently. Now, in addressing these issues, both NU and then, of course, the proceedings of the R20 summit go well beyond, as Professor Tim Shaw said, goes well beyond the tropes and truisms of approach to religion and world affairs that used to be widespread, not just in the West, but among the leadership of nations around the world. And I'm referring, of course, to secularization theory. Now, the R20, of course, the R20 proceedings built on a critique of secularization theory that had been going on for 30 or 40 years, not least of all, I will not claim any credit for it myself, but for a colleague of mine, Peter L. Berger, the late Peter L. Berger, who had grown up as a sociologist committed to secularization theory, but early on, as Tim implicitly referred to, became one of the critical reformulators of a post-secularization theory. And it was on this legacy that the R20 meetings and Nahdlatul Ulama's initiative, again under the leadership of Gus Yahya, built. So there was a longer history here. It was not just a development that's taken place in the last few years. It was a development in which Indonesia was central, and so not that the ulama central, but it was part of a global conversation and a rethink of the role of religion in modern world affairs. At once recognizing the positive role that religion can take, but also recognizing the need for a critical revision of certain obsolescent tenets, if I can quote more or less directly from some of Nahdlatul Ulama's recent statements and Gus Yahya's, I think, appeals. Now, why NU? Why would Indonesia in general and Nahdlatul Ulama in particular have an especially central role to play in this two-sided revisiting of the question of religion and modernity, religion and development? Now, for those of us who are familiar with Indonesian political and religious history, we understand that this isn't simple historical serendipity. It has to do with contingency and embedding and the role that Nahdlatul Ulama has played well before recent years. Indonesia is, of course, a country that's always been multi-streamed. I began my research in East Java in the late 1970s in an area where some of those streams in the late 1950s and early 1960s had gotten into rather severe clashes, one with the other. Pasuruan happened to be a Nahdlatul Ulama stronghold, but it was also a kabupaten or district in which the Indonesian Communist Party was well represented. So Indonesia, in building and taking this leading role today, it's not ignoring a complex fact. In fact, it's learning from, building on, reflecting on, abstracting from, and going beyond a world of struggle and contention, and providing us with guidance, and not just Indonesia, but with the world as a whole, guidance as to how to proceed. There's, again, as I said, a deeper history here. From the first years, and I'll say this for those, I'm going to provide a few background remarks on Nahdlatul Ulama, primarily for those of you who are not Indonesian, and for those of you who are Indonesian or know Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, Bu Alimatul, and Muhammadiyah and Aisyah, know that from the founding of these organizations, but in particular from the founding of Nahdlatul Ulama in 1926, Nahdlatul Ulama scholars and activists were distinctive among Muslim political leaders and scholars, in that they dedicated themselves very, very self-consciously to the twin causes of piety making, and by that I mean the religionization of society, bringing large numbers of people to a more careful and studied observance of their faith. But what was distinctive about Nahdlatul Ulama is from the 1920s onward, it also linked this emphasis on what I've described as piety making to nation making. And what was equally distinctive, and in fact from I work on comparative Muslim politics, I work on comparative Christian politics as well, but Muslim politics is my primary comparative interest. And what was distinctive was the degree to which Nahdlatul Ulama's vision of nation making was from the start, from 1926 on, premised again on an ideal of nationhood that combined what in Indonesia is referred to as ketuhanan, God, which can loosely be described as godliness or God-mindedness. It combines godliness, a concern with God, again, and that's not just Islam, again, but it blends those concerns with a commitment to a vision of nationhood that is again distinctive, because it's multi-ethnic and multi-religious from the beginning. This isn't a recent innovation. So inasmuch as Gus Yahya and Nahdlatul Ulama has invited Muslim scholars to rethink Sharia and fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, they do so not on the basis of a kind of born-again or recent born-again realization that certain obsolescent premises of Islamic fiqh need to be rethought, but that it builds on a practice that Nahdlatul Ulama has itself been involved in, although not always with an equally self-conscious concern with the reform of fiqh, but in practice Nahdlatul Ulama has been deeply involved with the reformulation of a new vision of the relation between religious ideals and multi-ethnic, multi-religious inclusivity for the better part of a century. That's rather extraordinary. And it also, again, encourages us to, particularly when we're talking about Nahdlatul Ulama in Indonesia in relation to the rest of the world, it allows us to say, no, this isn't a recent born-again reconfiguring of what NU is about. It's a deepening and a more self-conscious revision of Islamic traditions, but it's one that builds on deep historical precedents. Now, when I first came to Indonesia in the late 1970s, again, beginning my research in Pasuruan, again, for those of you who know a little bit about Indonesia, Pasuruan and Malang in the 1970s were not Gadjah, they were not PBNU Jakarta, they were not backwoods, but they were still not what they have become today. Indonesia was itself a society which was in the early phases of a great educational transformation, a great economic transformation, transformation that would not just trickle down to religious organizations like Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, Aisyah, but actually would be led and directed by figures from those religious organizations, again showing the distinctive leadership role played by religious people, Muslim people in particular in this Muslim majority country. And above those Muslim organizations, above all, stands, of course, Nahdlatul Ulama, with its some 70 to 100 million, depending on how you count, followers. Now, as I said when I first came here, in the late 1970s, there was a good deal of skepticism when people heard I was going to Pasuruan, and among other things, I was going to be looking at Muslim, non-Muslim relations. For those of you who know my work, which is probably not too many of you, you know I began my research not just in East Java, but among the Hindu minority there, Tengger, Masyarakat Tengger, the mountain-dwelling people up in the highlands who had, over the course of the 6 centuries of Islamization of Java, had retained a commitment to a variety of Hinduism that has great family resemblances with a variety of Hinduism that's practiced in Bali. A Resi Pujangga tradition, for those of you who know anything about Hinduism, a Resi Pujangga tradition, a distinctively Indonesian, but at the same time, global Hinduism. But when I began that research, many people said, Pasuruan, East Java? Again, why not Gadjah? Why not Jakarta? East Java, people thought, this is an area which is characterized by a high degree of intolerance, a legacy of conflict. Yes, it is true that in 1965, some of the worst, and in the run-up to 1965, some of the worst social struggles over land holding, over political mobilization that occurred anywhere in Indonesia had taken place in East Java. So when I said in the 1970s that I was going to East Java to look at Muslim, non-Muslim, and then Muslim minority relations with Muslim majority organizations like Nahdlatul Ulama, many people thought I was a romantic fool. This is Nahdlatul Ulama will never accommodate itself to the reality of religious pluralism. Nahdlatul Ulama will never genuinely commit itself to a democratic program other than one that is majoritarian in its central impulses. Now again, the late 1970s was a period when Indonesia had not yet gone into its, had not yet experienced its full return to democracy in 1998, 1999. It was still under the control of President Muhammad Suharto and the New Order. But what was interesting, and what proved the skeptics with whom I spoke overseas in Europe and the United States, which proved them wrong, was that even in the late 1970s and 1980s, as soon as I got to Pasuruan, as soon as I interacted with Muslim scholars, and NU scholars in particular in Malang and Surabaya, it was clear to me that this ferment, this interest in a kind of revitalization of Islamic thinking, not yet in the full-blown addressing fiqh, jurisprudence way that Gus Yahya and NU has now accomplished, but it was already there. It was already not merely anticipated, it was underway. And it was underway for the same reason that I mentioned a moment ago. Because at the heart of Nahdlatul Ulama, there is not just a deep commitment to a profession of Islam and fidelity to the commands of God, the commands of Allah. There was also a deep love of nation. That has always been the trademark of Nahdlatul Ulama. And that love of nation, Gus Dur, the late Abdurrahman Wahid, was perhaps most representative of this. I met Gus Dur in 1990 in Jakarta after I had been working in East Java. But it was clear even before I had met him that in places like East Java, the local Nahdlatul Ulama organization was already in practice, if not yet in full fiqh justified theory, developing a new practice of citizenship and love of nation, and one that would create a kind of imbrication between the ideals of an inclusive, multi-ethnic and multi-religious nationalism and the deepest and truest values of Islam. So in this sense, what we are seeing, the efflorescence and kind of fruition of Islamic thought that we now see from NU, again under the leadership of Gus Yahya, but it does have roots. It has roots in those interreligious relations that I had the good opportunity to see long ago. But perhaps I'll end my remarks here just by saying, making a few remarks about my late friend and dear teacher, a man who's been to my house in Boston, Massachusetts, 6, 7, 8 times. I'm speaking here of Abdurrahman Wahid, a man with whom I met dozens of times here in Indonesia. And in many ways, I think one doesn't want to overemphasize any single figure, but I would identify Gus Dur as not the pioneer. As you've heard me say, these changes were underway in NU practice and theory much, much earlier. But he embodied, I think, the highest spirit of NU. He also led NU, but he embodied something that was general. Gus Dur's far-ranging intelligence, I see this in NU, other NU leaders today, but his far-ranging intelligence allowed him to talk in multiple intellectual registers simultaneously, addressing different kinds of social communities. In one moment, in Boston, meeting with Peter Berger, I also took him over to meet Sam Huntington. That didn't go well. Peter Berger, my late colleague and friend, Peter Berger, at first skeptical, fell in love with Abdurrahman Wahid. He immediately understood from his humor and from his brilliant ability to observe the world that this was a man of exceptional depth, insight, and moral character. So in one moment he could be talking about Islamic finance, and another moment he could be talking about why democratization in Egypt would not likely go as well as it would. He was confident in Indonesia. In another moment he would be telling jokes which were in kind of an Indonesian or English version, an adaptation of the kind of colloquial humor that in Ngoko, colloquial Javanese, he was so brilliant at. He was all of these. He was all of these simultaneously. This ability to engage and critique Sam Huntington, his ability to charm and convince Peter L. Berger, who, though we didn't agree on everything, was my colleague for 26 years and whom I think was a brilliant man. And Peter met with Gus Dur and was immediately charmed and won to his vision, his personality, his depth. So, and what my point here is that Gus Dur was not singular. And histories, both before Gus Dur wafat, before his passing away, well before it was already clear that there were that he was the embodiment of broader developments, especially in NU. Also we look in Muhammadiyah. Aisha, Abu Ali Matul is here, so I have to mention Aisha because she has taught me so much about Aisha over the last few years. And here too I see this similar distinctive spirit of depth and inclusivity that is indeed the trademark of Islam, but the trademark of Islam is practiced in Indonesia in particular. So it wasn't just Gus Dur that embodied the spirit. Gus Dur embodied the spirit of NU, of Indonesian Islam, precisely because that spirit was so general and shared by so many Indonesians. I say this abroad, and people think I'm pandering when I say it here in Indonesia, but I will say it again. Indonesia is a great country. Indonesia is a great country whose moment has come. Indonesian Islam, the Indonesian Muslim leadership, the Muslim intellectual tradition, which I study in other parts of the world as well. But the Muslim intellectual tradition here in Indonesia is a truly great Islamic, but not just Islamic. Professor Glendon moments ago underscored, and Tim as well underscored, it's a religious worldview that is shared by people in other faith traditions. So in conclusion, final paragraph, let me just welcome the publication of the Proceedings of the R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders, and let me emphasize that as far as all of us are concerned, I think we can celebrate this as a joyous and transformative moment. It bears witness to, again, I will say this, a great nation, Indonesia, showing a new, this is what's so distinctive, a new and well-deserved confidence. Indonesia's come of age. Nahdlatul Ulama has come of age. Both of these entities are showing a new and well-deserved confidence in their role as an agent of far-reaching rethinking of the role of religion in the modern world, showing people of multiple faiths a powerful way forward. The Proceedings also bear witness to a great leadership, as I've said, that of Nahdlatul Ulama under the executive direction of Haji Yahya Kolyostakov, but a leadership that is simultaneously, part of its brilliance is that it's reaching out to Muslim leaders from other parts of the world, not least of all, as I saw so exceptionally in Bali at the R20, reaching out to figures like Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Karim Al-Issa, whom I had the unexpected joy of having a private conversation with for 15 moments. I would not have thought, I did not know him. I knew the Muslim World League, of which he's leader, and I had not anticipated what I saw in Bali. And this, again, this collaboration, I think bears witness to a Nahdlatul Ulama and more generally an Indonesian style of inviting people into collaborations and cooperations where in the course of those collaborations, everyone undergoes a transformation, a positive transformation. That's the brilliance. That was the brilliance of the R20. That's the brilliance of Islam in Indonesia. That's the brilliance that we celebrate today and next week in Jakarta of Nahdlatul Ulama, an organization that announces to the world that Indonesia's time and Indonesians, Islam's time has come, and it's time for the rest of the world to both recognize and celebrate the greatness of this tradition and the greatness of this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Bob. Professor Robert Hefner mentioned about the global conversation of global religion and the need for critical revision when we look at the world and also religion. And I'm very proud also to hear that Peter Berger liked the perspective of Gus Dur. We are very proud. Okay, the last speaker is Professor Muhtar Masoud. Please, Pak Muhtar, time is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Wening. Selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. You just saw the end of the conversation already from Pak Bob. So I don't need to add anything because the only reason I came here is to celebrate what Pak Yahya already done. And you I have to call him Pak now because he's my leader. But I need to tell you that Ketua PBNU tidak berhak memberi gelar Kiai Haji ya. The chairman of MU is not supposed to give me a Kiai Haji as a title because I'm not. I just far away from that. So hati-hati. Nanti setiap orang dikasih Kiai Haji repot kan? Now, yes, I came to celebrate this, and the reason, many reasons. One of the reasons is that this work has put Indonesia on a world map. Because, well, there was a saying, I think by President Habibie. He made a joke about Singapore. Singapore is just a dot on a map. And Mr. Lee Kuan Yew responded by saying that better dot than riot. Because many outside of Indonesia learn about this country, and what they got is that always riots everywhere. Also in Pasuruan, where Pak Bob was there, riots everywhere. And today we have this work that promise to put Indonesia on a better, with a better picture, better place on a map. And that's the work of a person who just told us today he considered himself as, runaway child. I'm not sure about that, but he was sociologist by training in my school, closer here, but I'm not sure he did. Did you finish? I don't know. Yeah. Well, at this university, many who are successful later in their later life, mostly did not finish the school here. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I don't want to talk about this. Actually, I did not prepare anything. That's why I use this to make a notes. Yes. I would like to start with the biggest problems of humanity up to now is how to deal with differences. And humans are not good at it. Up to now we still have conflicts, war, small and big, and people do not find yet a good solution to conflict. See? And those dignitaries who met in Bali 1 year ago in November, I think promise us a way to deal with differences. And in Indonesia, long time ago, we tried to deal differences by let the pluralist society be there and find a way to talk about differences. That was, what we call in Sanskrit, Panchsila. See? Because we have that Sanskrit. Pancasila, 5 principles. And for a long time, we try to convince Indonesians that this is the way to deal with differences. And the second point I would like to raise here about this book, because Pak Makin told you about the many quotations from this. It's very good, yeah. I did not have much time, although today I got 2 copies of this book. Yeah? The one sent to me directly by the publisher, and the second today from the author. I would like to put the proposal in this book as a way of dealing with the issue. Religion is very important, and I just remember in November 2007, The Economist published an article by, who is the professor? Anyway, the article published a report. This is about public opinion in Nigeria, telling us about how important religion in the country, in Nigeria. And the Economist published a statistic: 90% of Muslims and about 75% of Christians believe that religion is more important than nationality. So they consider first Christian or Muslim, only then Nigerian. It rings the bell because long time ago in Indonesia, I'm not sure now, some people believe that religion is more important than nationhood. And that's, I think, the issue that discussed also in this book. And like, Pak Bob, mentioned about Gus Dur. Gus Dur also talked a lot about how to deal with nationalism, and of course, we used to know. Sometimes we confuse about nationalism and patriotism, and Gus Dur, I think, also promise I'm not sure the term back then, but we need to consider nationalism, at least nationhood, is important. And what we would like to see is in Indonesia is Islam in Indonesia, it's not necessarily Arabic tradition coming here, but Islam built into the house of Indonesia. Is that right? I'm not sure about that. You know better about Gus Dur. Now, up to now, I think this is the, like Pak Mujid said, next year we will have a general election and presidential election. This, in many times, comes into the big discussion, about religion and nationalism. That's the second point I would like to say about this book. The third is about the putting Indonesia on the map, because when I read mass media covering the R20 meeting in Bali a year ago, my sense was that not so many global media, cover that occasion. And if you want to have this idea disseminated all over the world so people know what we are talking about in this book, you need to deal directly. PBNO, I think, need to deal that issue directly to move media wings of your organization to deal with that. And I said, well, I opened this now. I know that I come across with the idea that Professor Paolo Benanti, Pak Makin, saya bisa baca sekarang. Page 274 about algorithmic, the timeless values of religion and their irreplaceable contribution to humane and peaceful development. My point is that one of your speakers talked about artificial intelligence. And this is important because artificial intelligence now also give us problem. So not only religion, give us problem, but also AI. So in that sense, when you try to disseminate here, you need to also deal with the issue of artificial intelligence in the popular, in the popular form. This is about the way we communicate, and that's well, actually, I don't finish yet the reading this article. But the point here is that you need to pay attention that might be AI, also will be a big problem if religious leaders are not aware of it. Okay, I think that's the what I would like to say. And again, I came here to celebrate what PBNO has done, and I really representing the anak buah would like to thank to what leaders in this work has done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muhtar Masud. I think Professor Muhtar Masud talk about how to deal with differences. We know we live in differences, but sometimes we don't see this as a reality. This is also the case, I think, in Indonesia. We face along our history. So now we have time for question and answer. Please, if you want to have question, raise a short question. We have already a lot of speakers here, so please with short question. One, Mbak Alim, and then yeah, Pak Musi. One more, maybe, yes, in the back, yeah. Ya, silakan Mbak. Mbak Alim. Mbak Alim. Ya.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. I think this is a very great pleasure for me to be here in the middle of all scholars and leaders. I just have a comment a little bit about the conservative turn and also strong progressive movement in Indonesian context in terms of gender issues. Because as Pak Bob mentioned that we believe that in terms of gender issues and women's rights in Islam, Indonesia in the position of continuous improvement. And for example, there are many women leaders in many aspects who now growing up about the women leader. We know in UGM also we have a female rector, so also and in many places there are increasing number of women leaders. So I think Indonesia is not part of, is not as user anymore, but as producer in the issue of gender, and women's rights. Because in Indonesia there are many people who have three combination of capability, which is intellectualism, activism, and spiritualism. So these three combinations make person strong and have high commitment to make life better. I remember when Pak Bob called me as living feminist in the Indonesian context, mean trying to combine between the feminist issue and religious issue, and then we can implement it in Indonesia. So I think Indonesia is ready, coloring the world with progressive view, with open mind, open heart, open will. And so I think, I believe that if I change myself, I change the world. So we ready for coloring the world in the issue of women's rights and issue of gender progressive movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is question you address to Pak Bob or to all of them? All of the speakers. Okay, all of the speakers. Okay, please. Pak Musin.
Yes,
thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me congratulate all the co-auditors as well as PBNU for the success of launching these very important books. I hope this book can be referenced by all the people in the world, how to see a good practice of religious values in our daily lives. I would like to give some comments and also actually proposals to R20. Firstly, I would like to share a lesson that I got from one of the classrooms from one of beloved professors who is now here, Professor Mohtar Masud. Long time ago, he taught us that issues usually emerge when values are being threatened. Was it right, Pak? Now, we are witnessing issues of religious values that are being threatened by, let's say, exclusivism, exclusive interpretation of religions that may cause intolerance, violence, and extremism. Then R20 is very timely and very relevant as well as contextual to answer such threats. And for that reason, I think Ministry for Foreign Affairs, where I belong to, is very much committed to make this idea and this initiative successful. Being said that, I would like to divide into two levels of perspectives at the institutional framework and operational framework. At the institutional framework, probably the government could make serious efforts to mainstream this initiative through diplomatic channels, like in the G20, like in the ASEAN and others. But at the operational level, operational framework, the government can probably formulate a policy. But how to operationalize those policies can only be materialized by social organizations like NU and Muhammadiyah. Now, our big homeworks is to translate all these noble ideas in the books into practical action that could be practiced by the people at the grassroots. And this is actually the big chunk of the homeworks that need to be continued by social organizations. Mainstreaming the ideas and proposals at the institutional level in the G20 and ASEAN, that is just a means. The end is how to put across those ideas to the grassroots. That is our homeworks. And to echo what Professor Mohtar mentioned, how to mainstream this idea globally, probably R20 may consider establishing some task forces on specific issues, like task force on human rights and humanitarian issues, because we have problems on human rights and humanitarian issues globally, and how religious values can contribute to facilitate discussion and also solution for those challenges. Another task force that may be worth considering is task force on culture of peace and tolerance. And thirdly, task force on environment and development issues. If we have those task forces and religious leaders can sit together with experts on those specific fields, then R20 can propose a reasonable solution that could be presented to intergovernmental level, like in the United Nations, ASEAN, and others. But it has to be specific and practical. That is just a comment and a proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Muhsin. And then the third one, please. Mention your name and also where are you from? I mean your organization.
Yeah, I'm Ahdar. I'm from Lombok. My organization is Nahdlatul Wathon. I would like to address the fifth issue on the book about what the future values that we should consider. And I think there are two things that I would like to ask from the perspective of Markus Mitzner and Burhanuddin Muhtadi, the research, and also the critics toward NU from Gus Baha. The interesting research from Mitzner and Muhtadi, where NU claims that they are the organization of tolerance, but in 2019, they are contribute the very strong polarizations which leads into many conflicts in the politics, and we are afraid that in 2024, the next year, as Pak Munjid said, we will face the same things. I'm questioning that will NU staying on Samikna wa ata'na to his followers, or just let them choose whichever they choose? And the second question is that I think it is interesting when Gus Baha said that in the current world, the value which is not working is that about discipline, right? You know, Gus Baha said in the current world, train station is more disciplined than religious leaders. You know, when we are going to train station, we are coming 30 minutes earlier or 1 hour earlier, and train station 7 is 7. But when we come to religious leaders meeting, I come this morning at 7:30, and in the rundown there will be the breakfast, and I don't find any breakfast. And at 8 o'clock the meeting should be started, and the religious leaders are not here. So yeah, I think Gus Baha is right. But I think there is the normalization from the religious leaders that state we should wait our teachers. So I'm questioning that, will these religious leaders or NU or Muhammadiyah normalizing the lateness by saying that we should wait our leaders, or changing that into a discipline of values in the future? So yeah, those two questions are your homework to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. From Lombok, ya, Nahdlatul Wathon. Okay, please for all of the all of the speakers, Pak Bob, please, you can answer all of these 3 questions.
I just excuse the self-promotion here. This isn't self-promotion, but I just completed a book that will be coming out in January on Islam and citizenship in Indonesia, the search for an inclusive public ethics. And needless to say, as a scholar of Islam and of Indonesia from outside of Indonesia, and a non-Muslim himself, I had to take into account the survey data that you just referred to by Marcus Mitzner and Burhanuddin, both of whom in what I thought, and I think Ahmad Suwaidi felt this as well. I heard a comment that he made about this particular article that they published. I felt that this was a very offensive and insulting mischaracterization of Nahdlatul Ulama. The survey data to which they referred, of course, shows that, as is the case in every democratic country, I emphasize that, not least my own United States of America, when you survey general populations about issues of tolerance, particularly those that have certain practical relevance, as here in Indonesia, such as building a church or a pura, Hindu shrine, temple, in a Muslim majority issues, the surveys consistently find significant majority and or near majority reservations. But I would ask you to sort of compare the findings from Indonesia with just about anywhere in Western Europe and the United States. There's no significant difference. Indeed, on matters of Islam, the American surveys show a much higher level of intolerance, suspicion, and mischaracterization. Now, I'm not decrying my own country. My point is to emphasize that the use and abuse of survey data, because maafkan saja, yes, I'm being a little bit too personal about Mitzner and Mutadi Burhanuddin's article, but they don't talk at all about leadership. They don't talk at all about scholarship. They make it seem as if what's decisive is, if you will, what the majority feels as captured in surveys. Here, the LSE, Syaiful Mujani's organization in Jakarta, does a much better job, because they juxtapose survey data on, well, what would you as a Muslim feel about a church or a pura being built in your Muslim majority area? They juxtapose that with something that's equally important, about which I was talking just a moment ago, and what's most distinctive about Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama, but also Muhammadiyah. That's love of a nation. So when you do those same polls and ask people, should the basis of the state be changed from a Panchasila vision of inclusivity, multi-religious nationalism, and multi-ethnic inclusivity, the data goes sky high. That is 84%, again, depending on how you frame it, 84% of the Indonesian public says no. They don't want to change the constitutional basis. They don't want an Islamic state, which of course, as we all know, is a mischaracterization. Islamic state, as understood today, has nothing to do, or little to do, with Muslim majority states in the Middle East historically. It's a fiction, it's a fantasy invention of Islamists in modern times. But anyway, that's another thing. So, but when you look at the polling data from the perspective of love of nation, dedication to Panchasila principles. Those are not liberal principles in the secular post-1960s sense, where religion isn't supposed to matter, as Professor Glendon and Tim Shaw both summarize very nicely. It's not a secular liberalism. It's a multi-ethnic, inclusive, pluralist. I call it a civic pluralist democracy. And by those measures, not of secular liberalism, post-70s, post-80s, American or French version, but take Indonesia, take the world on its own terms. When you use those measures, Indonesia does not look like this grim, intolerant place that the Burhanuddin Mitzner studies show. Indonesia, again, comes the data, survey, as well as intellectual surveys, discussions of fiqh, jurisprudence, intellectual reform, pembaruan. You have decades of remarkable studies, evidence that shows that Indonesia is a country in which there has a great experiment has been undertaken for decades, and it's no longer an experiment. And things like the launching of these R20, they speak the proceedings, and the effort, the now much more self-conscious and deliberately systematic effort on the part of NU to reform certain aspects of fiqh, testifies to the fact that the cultural process is not captured correctly in these kind of superficial summaries of what's supposed to be public opinion, but a public opinion which again is selective and misrepresentative. Juxtapose the things on church building with love of Indonesia. And when you look at those, when you take that fuller picture again, am I a romantic, am I an idealist? I don't think so. Indonesia comes across once again, and the Muslim community in Indonesia, and Nahdlatul Ulama in Indonesia comes across as a remarkable experiment that has moved beyond experiment to delivery, and now models and lessons for the broader Muslim and non-Muslim world. So I take strong exception to their very pessimistic misrepresentation of survey data and think, no, there's something much, much, much more interesting, a blessing to the world taking place in this country. Maafkan apabila saya sedikit.
Okay, thank you, Pak Bob. Maybe Pak Muhtar would like to answer about the question of Mbak Alim about gender.
Very quick on Bu Alim's question observation. I always go back to the 3 E's. Well, that's A, and E. So it's the 3 values. And I go back to education, employment, and what my wife, who wrote a book on Islamizing intimacies in Indonesia, calls intimacies. So E-E-I. In Indonesia, it's A-A-E. In education, you look at what's happened in education over the last 30 years in Indonesia, and now the number of women who graduate from high school and the number of women who graduate compared to men from college is greater. So there's been an educational revolution. This wasn't the case in the 60s, 70s. It's something that comes online. It began even under the New Order. We have to give the New Order some credit for educational infrastructural improvements, and women did not hesitate, and they were not largely obstructed from taking advantage of those educational opportunities. So now 54% of the people who graduate from university every year are women. Employment, compare Indonesia, I believe the figure is 54, 57% of women work outside of the home. Compare that with the United States. The United States is 2 or 3 percentage points higher. Compare it with Jordania, Jordan, Egypt. What's the rate of female employment? In Egypt, it's about 17%. 17% versus 57%. So just as in education and in employment, no, excuse me, maafkan saja, there is not a conservative term. The wearing of a jilbab is not, in my mind, a conservative term. The being more concerned with sexual propriety is not a conservative term. Associating all those things with liberalism is, to me, to buy into a very, very superficial. So, but the final thing, my final E is the E in the Indonesian, it's the intimacies. And again, this is harder to measure, requires more detailed ethnograph. But here, I think, is another one of the great transformations. Many people have talked about it, but it's the shift toward a more companionate model of husband-wife relations. Bu Alimatul, you've written about this beautifully. Others have as well. The idea that, yes, even though there might be a formal recognition in some circles of the husband, the father, as being more of the, having more responsibilities and or different responsibilities, when you look at who cleans dishes, well, it's not equal. It's not equal in the United States. But it's changed. When you look at childcare, when you look at any of the conventional measures that we associate with intimacies and sharing a life together as a husband and wife, there has been a great transformation in Indonesian Islamic intimacies. So in all those regards, education, employment, and again, this generic, general category of intimacies, Indonesia is not in the throes of some kind of backward-looking conservative turn. The gender transformation in an Islamic way and in an Indonesian way is well underway, it's alive, and it is well.
Thank you, Pak Gop. Yeah. Pak Muhtar, you would like to know? Okay, yeah. Or maybe Mas Almakin, you would like to respond? Fine? Okay, sorry, representative. Okay, yeah, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments in response to these wonderful questions and issues raised. First, in the spirit of Gotong Royong, I wanted to thank one other person I forgot to thank for his extraordinary role in the R20 volume. That's my colleague Tom Dinham, who's Director of Communications for the Center for Shared Civilizational Values. It shows that the editors were, in some cases, not always fully competent, that Tom Dinham caught many, many errors at the tail end of the proofreading that we had failed to catch. So, Tom, thank you very much for your tremendous role in making the volume a success. I just want to comment on Pak Muksin's excellent comments and excellent suggestions. I first want to enthusiastically agree with what you said, Pak Muksin, about recognizing that the job of government and political institutions is really to provide a help and support to the more fundamental work of social organizations and religious organizations. So this is one way, I think, to describe what in Catholic social teaching is called subsidiarity. The job of the government is to provide a help to the more important work of civil society, including groups like Nahdlatul Ulama. So I think that's an excellent point. The work of ASEAN, the work of the G20, the work of governments like Indonesia is a means to an end. So once the government has done its job, the job has only begun. It hasn't ended. That's an extremely important point that I think we just have to continue to remember and think about. And in particular, your comment that there should be task forces to actually carry through the work that has been begun in the R20, for example, is an excellent one. We have in the Center for Shared Civilizational Values in Nahdlatul Ulama, we have, based on what was accomplished at the R20, created working groups in order, I think, to fulfill some of the functions that you rightly described. So, for example, we have a kind of working group on shared values, which is also encompassing the issue of human rights, and an issue that you raised in your excellent comments. And that working group, as we speak, is organizing a conference at Princeton University in December on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if all goes well, that Princeton conference will issue a statement or a declaration which hopefully will do exactly what you proposed, hopefully it will contain specific and practical proposals concerning how religious communities should cooperate with each other on the issue of human rights, and hopefully will identify shared principles that religious communities can take to the United Nations, to other entities of that sort. We have other working groups that have been stood up. Now we need to sort of accelerate the activity of those other working groups, a working group on artificial intelligence, a working group on recontextualization, and so forth. So thank you very much, Pak Kung Sun. We're trying to do what you brilliantly identified.
Thank you, Pak Timothy. And Mas Najib, silakan.
Thank you very much, audiences, for some important response. I would like to respond to two things. First is from our friends from Lombok, yeah, regarding the issue of, let's say, tolerance and also Nahdlatul Ulama and so on. So I think it is an interesting issue. Actually, at that time we also invited Burhan for a discussion, and we come to such kind of explanation that his analysis is also in certain extent also biased on the approach he chose from the very beginning in terms of how explaining the situation through what at the time we discussed is like political economy kind of approach, explaining that actually how that's actually the link between the elite and the masses having like such patron-client relationship, such kind of thing. That is the first. And the second one also, we need to also refer to another important book by Jeremy Menchik, I think, some years ago, regarding Islam and Democracy in Indonesia, with subtitle Tolerance Without Liberalism. He said that tolerance in Indonesia having certain kind of characteristic which is in a certain way different with liberalism proposing by, let's say, Western standard kind of. So this is, I think, interesting, actually based on some grounded research in Nahdlatul Ulama and also NU community and some other mass organization actually explaining there is a certain kind of tolerance in Indonesia and part of the public ethic, but this is different with the actually liberalism proposing by, let's say, most of the Western values kind of. So we should actually locate the discussion in, let's say, broader context. That's the first one. The second, I also following Pak Tim actually responding to Pak Mohsin. This is, thank you very much, Pak Mohsin. I know very well that you are part of the, let's say, institutional level framework. You are part of the Kemenlu who actually support us significantly in some event, yeah, in the R20 and also in ASEAN IIDC. And I actually agree with actually your, let's say, proposal in terms of how we should pay attention to the operational level, yeah, in the post R20, let's say, event. And we actually, to a certain extent, have done several things, including one of the important events is actually regarding the Muktamar International Fikih Peradaban, which is actually Pak Ulil here involved and very much from how then actually the idea of Nahdlatul Ulama really operated in the grassroots level. So I think I will propose to Pak Ulil to respond a little bit about this. And of course, Pak Yahya himself, who actually involving in many ways, actually in operationalizing the, let's say, the general idea or the ideals into the concrete level in the grassroots level. So that is my response, Bu Ning.
Thank you, Mas Najib, because there's one question from the audience to Nahdlatul Ulama. Maybe Pak Yahya, you would like to add 1 or 2 words? No? Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. I will not make a conclusion, but what I want to emphasize is please read the book. Please read the book. Please share the books to your colleagues, your friends. It is very important. There are a lot of experiences in that book from all over the world, bad experiences, but also best practices, written in this book. So please read these books and also circulate to your colleagues and friends, because we can see also how we deal with the intersection of many things, I think, nationhood, pluralism, religiosity, etc. So please give big applause to all of the speakers today, and thank you very much for all of the audience for participating in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bu Bening. Thank you very much for all of the speakers. Thank you very much for your time in our university. Dan sebelum kita menutup acara pada pagi hingga siang hari ini, marilah kita berdoa bersama terlebih dahulu. Let us pray together. And we would like to invite Kiai Mas'ud Masduki. Kami mengundang kepada Bapak Kiai Mas'ud Masduki, mohon berkenan untuk memimpin jalannya doa pada kesempatan pagi hingga siang hari ini. Kami silakan Pak Kiai.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, all speakers speak in English, so let me speak and pray in Arabic language. Today is Friday, so I will deliver a prayer about the peace of the word. Yukra'u bil qalqalah, word dibaca dengan qalqalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Hamdan yuwafi ni'amahu wa yukafi'u mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamd kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhikal karim wa 'azimi sultanik. Allahumma shalli ala sayyidina Muhammadin alladhi arsalahu Allah rahmatan lil alamin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma antas salam wa minkas salam wa ilaika a'udu salam. Fahayyina Rabbana bis salam wa adkhilna al jannata darus salam. Tabarakta Rabbana wa ta'alita ya dal jalali wal ikram. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adzaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin khalqihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih kami sampaikan kepada Bapak Kiai Mas'ud Masduki. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our agenda this morning to this afternoon. Once again, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. We send all of the gratitudes to our speakers, our moderators, and also all of participants here for succeeding this launching of the book for this morning. Thank you very much once again for your come. Thank you very much for your attention. See you on the next beautiful occasion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang.